Hello everybody, welcome. Very interesting discussion so far. Some of my presentation has got some repeat themes in it, so I apologise for that. I'm standing here going, everyone's stealing my lines, but anyway. So what I wanted to start with is by actually asking everybody in this room who here considers themselves a professional. So put your hand up if you'd say, I'm a professional. And I think that's an interesting point because obviously looking across this room, and I know quite a few people in it, I would consider you professionals too. I would have no trouble referring a client to anybody in this room knowing that they would be looked after. But I suppose one of the first points is that how does the customer know that? How does the consumer know that? And how do they know how to differentiate a professional agent from another? Also, the other thing is we say we are professional, but are we really? And I think part of this journey towards being a professional is actually to set a standard that actually may be higher than what we all in this room aspire to, and I think that that's a very good thing. So the way I looked at this path to professionalism is, why are we bothering? Like, why bother? To get change from humans, generally it has to start with it appealing to their self-interest. And I think that we're at an interesting point. I think, Kyla, you made an interesting point there about a renaissance and what is old is new again. And I think we are actually at that point. And I think for us for us to make the effort, because to become a professional is not going to be an easy path, it will take effort. We have to look at that and say, what's in it for us and why would you do it? And I think that the consumer is asking us to do it, where they actually do see value in a real estate agent. I believe that. They just want us to behave better and to provide better value. So it's going to start, like in terms of the path of how we get to being a profession, is we actually have to start by shifting our own values and our own behaviours. That's where it begins. So it starts with us thinking about whether it's worth our while to do it. I think as an industry, we have a lot of cultural issues that have brought us to this point. I think deregulation started that years ago, and also we have a culture in our industry whereby, why do you become a real estate agent? It's because you want to drive a Mercedes and fly first class to London. And why would you want to do that? It's because you deserve it. And that culture, I think, has come back to cause us trouble. And where we need to shift to, and what the consumer wants us to do, is to actually act with a degree of responsibility. So instead of being motivated to get the Mercedes, we need to be motivated by acting and behaving in a responsible way, where we actually take somebody's asset that they've worked very hard for and is very dear to them, and we actually deal in a responsible fashion in order to get that sold or to manage it. And I think the consumer wants that. Also, why else? I think that I agree, I think the biggest problem that we have in our industry is actually us. So in all this talk of disruption and disintermediation and all these things, all those things will succeed if we are not adding value and if we don't actually start by looking at ourselves. And I think the path to professionalism actually helps with that, because it gives us a way of actually differentiating ourselves and increasing our skills. So I think the thing about real estate is how we do our business actually reflects the cultural values of the society that we act in. And I think that we've reached a point whereby the consumer is asking for us to be authentic. That has happened because we now have transparency around information. So even the pricing discussion, which has always been fraught, now is actually really quite easy, because when we go in to price somebody's house, they've actually already priced them themselves, and they know what it's worth. So it's changed that discussion. In the old days, you actually went in with the information for them to understand what their property is worth. So that's changed it completely, whereby the pricing discussion now is actually a judgment of character. So if you go in and you are too low, then you don't know what you're talking about. If you go in and you are too high, then you're already lying to them. And they've got the information to be able to assess that. So that's a really, really, really exciting opportunity. And it's actually giving us permission to be authentic. So I don't know if anyone went to, those who went to AREC this year, a lot of talk about being authentic. So it's amazing, isn't it, when you can have 4,000 people in a room writing down on a piece of paper, be authentic. And I think there's probably people in our industry that would struggle with that, to think that for 20 years I have not been authentic. So how do I become that? And I think that, I actually think that the consumer is giving us permission to be authentic and to tell the truth. And the reason we can do that is because they can judge us on that, and then they can form a character judgment on us. So I think it's a very, very exciting time for us. And I think the path to professionalism actually will help us differentiate ourselves from all of those people who are doing the low fee model, and there'll always be room for that. It would allow us to be able to charge more. It would allow us to be able to separate ourselves in a crowded market. And I also think it's our biggest protection that we have against disruption. So I know in our firm, we spend a lot of time talking about how are we adding value. And of course, adding value now is a range of things to different people depending on who you're talking to. So whether it's getting an extra 10% on the rent, whether it's getting an extra $50,000 in the on-floor negotiation that you're having in an auction, whether it's because you've actually helped them get their property ready for selling by styling, painting, all the things that have to be done to organise it. Everybody has different ways of actually differentiating value. And I think one of the big things that we can do is to stand out from an education point of view and a standards point of view and actually be a profession. So, Kylie, when you talked about the RP data statistics, that actually brought something home to me, which was, I'm sure everybody's seen the CoreLogic report, where they surveyed vendors and asked them the question about what they wanted from an agent, and they actually came back with a very parochial response, which was no, starts with B, ends with T, which I didn't want to say that word because now I'm a professional. I didn't think that was a professional thing, but that's interesting that that actual terminology is... but it's interesting that that sort of terminology is used, you know, that they're that strong in it. So in terms of the path to professionalism, we're actually already on the path of it, and the changes that are coming to the educational standards that Victor spoke to and alluded to, it's actually already here. So we're moving down this path without actually having to do anything because it's going to increase our standards. So the certificate of registration is going to 7 units of competence now. It was 4. But the basic crux of it is that certificate of registration are going to be able to do less things, and they're going to have to be supervised more. So we can look at that to say that's onerous. So things like a certificate of registration would not be able to enter into a contract like an agency agreement that may need to be signed off by a licensee or a licensee in charge. So when you think about that now, I've got a lot of people with certificate of registrations that are running around doing that very task, but that's one of the restrictions that will come. Obviously, the point of these things is to encourage people to actually get educated. And education is a good thing, right? The more that we can have it, the better. What have I done? Real estate license must complete the certificate 4 and must do 12 months of experience. So I think that's very good. So at least, you know, I remember when I started, it was 2 years, so 12 months. Licensee in charge, a new category. where it's a diploma level qualification, so Certificate 4, plus an equivalent qualification in business management. So a greater emphasis on how to manage a business, and 2 years experience with a licensed business. So again, more onerous qualification, but actually it's just returning to what we had in the past. CPD. So certificate holders don't need to do a CPD because they'll be completing their Certificate 4 in property services. License holders and licensees in charge will change from 12 points to 6 hours. So instead of just getting your points basically off the internet, you actually now need to do face-to-face education. 3 hours of that will be mandatory and 3 hours will be elective. And a licensee in charge has to do an additional 3 hours of CPD focused on business skills. So a massive upgrade in what's going to be expected of us. So where does this link to professionalism? By actually fitting in with those standards, we're actually moving down the path. So I'm not sure if I've got these levels exactly right. But certificate of registration will be an entry level as a profession. A license will take you to be level 4. A licensee in charge will take you to level 5. And altogether there's 10 levels. So just by completing the education that we're being told to do basically is we are moving down the path. You'll be moving down the path of professionalism whether you like it or not. And then from level 6 to 10, it goes to undergraduate degrees and doctorates. So I thought that would be pretty cool if we actually had real estate agent and doctorate in the same sentence. And being a competitive type of group, I'm sure there'll be a bunch of people who want to be level 10. So that can't be a bad thing. Thank you.
Thanks, Ewan. Thanks, mate. I'll take that one. Okay, we're going to move on now to our beloved CEO, Mr. Tim McKibben, and Braden Walters, our board member. And they're just going to go a little bit more the nitty-gritty. Then we'll do some questions on all these different levels and so on so that you can get that right. And Ewan just made one little error there. The actual 3 hours of CPD can be done online. It'll just be very restricted and regimented in terms of what you can do online. So that just make that one crystal clear.